In the first two episodes, I talked about economics design. The first one was on the economics design of a video game, and the second is on viruses and what can we learn from viruses that's applicable to economics design. In the next few episodes, I will dive deeper into different various topics, as well as the design or economics of the various key issues or topics surrounding it. But before I go on to that, I really want to take this episode to talk about token economics, what it entails, what disciplines it covers, and why do we have to care about it in the first place. There's a wide range of taxonomy when it comes to token economics. You have token economics, tokenomics, token engineering, economics of token engineering. I would say the economics of token engineering is the broadest category and everything else is somewhere in between. And there is no right or wrong, it's just terms or taxonomies that represent different specific subsets. They're all similar but different in their own ways. Ultimately, the economics of token engineering is a multidisciplinary subject. Today I'll be sharing 3 things. 1. What interdisciplinary subjects token economics entail. 2. Why token economics is so fun and will change the world. And 3. What does the future of token economics look like and how near are we from that reality? So, part 1, multidisciplinary subject. The most exciting part of economics is that it's multidisciplinary. It includes basic economic fundamentals like supply, demand, and opportunity cost. So, the first subject, economics. In the most fundamental starting point, token economics is about managing the supply and demand of tokens while considering the opportunity cost of doing so. Demand can't always be created. As the designer of the ecosystem and token, it is important to think of the use cases and the value add that the token can bring. This defines the demand of the tokens. The more use cases and value add it brings to the users, the more sustainable the demand is. With supply, there are few ways to play with it. You can look at fixed supply, increasing supply, decreasing supply, or dynamic supply. There's no fixed specific playbook to how supply works. It really varies according to your use case. Now, opportunity cost is the last aspect of economics that plays a huge role. Let's say you have 15 minutes. You can choose to either watch an episode of Tiger King or hit the gym with your personal trainer. You can't do both at the same time. So you have to choose the option that makes you the happiest. Since there's this social distancing thing going on, you're probably going to want to watch Tiger King and understand the memes online. That's opportunity cost, the inherent cost of giving something up when you choose another. Tokens exist in the primary market and the secondary market. So a user can either use the token in the primary market directly in the ecosystem, or the user can take the token out and sell it off to someone else in the secondary market. Your goal is to make it more worth it to use the tokens in the primary market than to sell it on the secondary market. How do you do that? You develop real use cases. You make sure that it adds value to the users, and it has more value to be used in the primary market than the secondary market, and for it to be expensive in the secondary market. When I talk about expensive, I don't mean the financial expensive, but I mean expensive in the economical term, in the opportunity cost term. For example, your use case of the primary market is so good that people are not willing to sell the excess in the secondary market. For instance, your use case in the primary market is to gain access to the latest stem cell research for medicational purposes. And you don't want to sell it to the secondary market because it's economically expensive, because if you need the medication for whatever reason, it's costly in terms of time and effort to get access to the medication. You can only get the medication through the token. So you want to make it costly for people to sell it in the secondary market. The second subject, corporate governance. One of the topics of discussion in the financial markets is to find the optimal corporate governance mechanism for the company. I know everyone is really tired of hearing about Adam Neumann and WeWork, but one of the reasons they went south was because of the strange corporate governance structure. The voting power, which is how decisions are made within the company, is disproportionately given to founders like Adam Neumann and his wife,
instead of allocating it proportionally to people owning WeWork stocks.
Do you see why that is bad? With less equity stocks, the founder has less skin in the game. And when in this scenario, when he still has a lot of voting powers with less skin in the game, his decisions could adversely affect the investors that hold equity, where he has more to gain and less to lose. So to make sure that he has enough skin in the game to ensure it becomes a disincentive or a punishment when he makes bad decisions, then you want to have your voting powers allocated proportionally to the equity stocks being held.
Another case for the call of proper corporate governance is in ETFs, exchange traded funds. Basically, a bunch of companies own plenty of voting rights in mostly public traded companies. These companies rarely use their voting rights, and that's a problem as well. We call it voters' apathy. So with that in mind, a few issues corporate governance hope to resolve includes voting, power distribution, and the level of centralization needed. If this is still a huge topic of discussion in today and a huge research topic in the academia space, things would be 100 times more challenging when the level of decentralization increases.
In token economics, there are a few things to consider too. From the type of voting mechanism, the distribution of power, the level of centralization, the level of authority, so you have manager, board of directors, or managers, directors, board of directors. And all these have to be aligned and ensure that they are right balance so that decisions can be made fairly.
The third subject, governing policies.
What about governing policies? When I talk about governing policies, I'm looking at the perspective of a government, whereas corporate governance was looking at the perspective of a firm or a company.
It is not easy to govern a country, unless perhaps, you're a dictator and you run the best career in the world. You have to prepare for crises like a global pandemic and financial crisis. How do you determine how much money should be given to each sector and each industry? How do you bargain during trade wars, and what industries should you protect? How do you use tax revenues collected to build infrastructure, bail out banks, or give them directly to your citizens? Governing policies exist to try and stabilize an economy. It also acts as a barrier to prevent bad things from happening, like a shutdown in the economy.
In a token economic sense, it means how do you allocate surplus? Token surplus, new tokens minted, transaction fee surplus, product surplus. How do you determine the right balance of transaction fee?
These are all very important questions to consider and to define them in the economics of the ecosystem that the token exists in. The fourth subject, complex dynamic evolution. Now here comes the fun part, complex dynamic evolution. Last week, we talked about the evolution of RNA viruses and how it is part of the life cycle of a virus. To constantly undergo change is a natural process. Even when the ecosystem is not on a digital and virtual world, it will undergo evolution. That could be from a change in user type, preferences of miners and validators, or just suggestions to improve the fundamentals of the ecosystem. These will cause the ecosystem to change and evolve. Going back to the governing policies and economics, this would have to change as the ecosystem evolves. This means governing policies have to be flexible enough to adapt to the changing needs of the ecosystem and the user base. So that means some level of governance or governing policies can be hard-coded, but ideally less hard-code is best because you have to change them constantly as the ecosystem evolves. And the fifth subject, behavioral economics. At the end of the day, economics is a social science, it's not a hard science. And that's why there is a shift towards softer sciences like behavioral economics.
It is dependent on people and their behaviors. Hence, we cannot fully control or fully predict or model people's behavior that's beyond our control. However, we can increase the probability of their behaviors in specific ways, such as marketing, incentive mechanisms, punishments, advertising. These are all softer ways to increase the probability of people's behaviors.
Block science has developed CAD, which is computer-aided design, so that businesses can model and predict the behaviors of people, hence the ecosystem. Behavioral economics is also part of human psychology, to understand why people do what they do. And by understanding that, we can reduce the uncertainty of people's behavior. In the token ecosystem, that means developing the various incentive mechanisms to encourage certain behavior. It is a mix of UI design and psychology. Building a game on blockchain, the goal is not to promote blockchain as the main marketing tool. The goal is to make queuing at a crowded brunch place too short because users want to continue playing. Encouraging more trade on your DeFi platform, it's not about giving all the various derivatives options possible. What you want to do is to make it easy to use and to connect with updates so you can encourage users to come back to open the app more often. There are a lot more subjects and disciplines that token economics focuses on, like law and regulations and a lot of other things. But I just want to highlight five disciplines, and that's more than enough for you to dive deep into any one of them to have a better understanding of what token economics involves. So let's move on to part 2. What makes token economics fun? The first answer is it's a closed loop system. Why is it easier to manage a zoo than an open safari? A zoo has more constraints like enclosures and areas for specific animals. In a safari, anything goes. Lions can jump on your safari jeep, or lions can eat humans because some genius decided that taking a selfie with a wild lion is a good idea.
In the digital space, we call this a closed loop system. And things are basically constrained within specific parameters. And the fun thing is we get to design and we get to define these parameters. So we get to engineer them towards the kind of outcomes that we want so that we can build proper constraints within our control and we can reduce externalities with good design.
In an open loop, there's no capacity for feedback. The level of complexity is also limited to engineer. For example, going back to the example of the open safari, whatever happens. There's very little there's very little capacity to get feedback for what happens in an open safari. It's just wild and it's just open, anything happens. With a closed loop system, like a zoo, it's possible to constantly redefine the system through state feedback. So that will be, you realize that this specific enclosure layout, it's not well designed for tigers, so you change them to make sure that it's more adapted to the natural habitat of tigers. It can also be engineered to achieve desired behaviors. So if you want tigers to be running around more often, then you be hanging the meat in weird places where they have to be jumping around and look for the meat instead of just feeding them. So that's the difference between an open loop and closed loop.
Do remember, the purpose of the token is a driving factor to coordinate different participants towards a shared goal in the ecosystem. And it's not to derive value in a secondary market. It's called secondary market for a reason because that's secondary priority. The primary priority is to make sure that it coordinates people within an ecosystem and they move towards the same objective.
The second reason why token economics is fun is that new is always better. The old classical management is not enough, as seen in issues with corporate governance, governing policies, black swan events like global pandemic, and now we have a chance to build the ecosystems from scratch.
It's not just about how to value your token. It's a lot more than that. It encompasses so many disciplines. Economics, complex systems, law, regulations, governance, policy, psychology, engineering, so many different things. Tokens are just a representation of value, which can be divided into infinitely small figures. But the economic system that allows the tokens to exist is far more complicated than that. And this is where the key economics comes in. This is where the key skill sets lies.
This is also where we could probably give democracy another chance. Did you know that Plato hated democracy? But with proper voting mechanisms and systems, perhaps democracy could be different in the digital virtual world. Voting can be delegated to people with better information. Voting can be adjusted with time through continuous voting. Or we could simply allocate votes instead of one person, one vote.
Lastly, it gives us a new way to govern the commons.
Commons are common goods that we all share, like air, water, space. In the digital world, we have things like bandwidth that we have to share. So how then do we prioritize the bandwidth for your data versus my data? What can we do to design fairer bandwidth allocation? And who determines which data is more important? These are very important topics and considerations when also designing the tech aspects, because it's not just about the economics aspect, it's also about the physical or the hardware that enables, or the resources that enables all these transactions to flow. And lastly, the future of token economics. As we move from information-based economy to knowledge-based economy, people need to become both specialists and generalists. So information-based economy is more of hard skills like memorizing facts, being able to do things with labor, to use labor in exchange for capital. Whereas knowledge-based economy is a lot more soft skills like application of facts, managing people, communication, things that uses your intrinsic capital in exchange for capital. And I foresee multidisciplinary subjects to be the main shift in universities with time to come. In the future, token economics and token engineering will be the domain programs with a multidisciplinary focus. The world is simply getting more complex, and so are humans and the systems we create. Token economics will be more than just economics, but includes biology, complex systems, law, regulation, policies, governance, finance, physics, math. It's going to be really, really fun. And I hope this allows people to start diving into all their different passions and topics and things they're interested in, and try to bring them together to create the right kind of ecosystem and right kind of balance that requires all sorts of information and knowledge.
Economics and engineering are not the same though, even when it comes to token economics and token engineering. Economics is more of the what to optimize and analyzing the results and outcomes. Engineering is more of the how to optimize, when it's going to be focusing more on models and mathematics.
Talking about models, everyone keeps asking me, what about models? Can we create a model, and do we have models available? We're not exactly there yet, but we're inching closer every day. In general, I think there's a standard framework for the economic side. For example, what are the general factors or variables that I have to consider to decide what to optimize and what should I analyze? But the application of these factors and variables requires deep specialized knowledge to the specific objectives of the ecosystem and the types of participants in the network, which constantly changes, remember.
The engineering part uses foundational principles that we see today, but the application still requires specific kind of knowledge. That's why you have to be both a specialist and a generalist that I mentioned before. We will continue to use economics and engineering foundation from the first principles basis, because that doesn't change that much. The basic foundational principles can be applied across all industries and projects. Right now, we don't see a model coming together yet, because everything is still being experimented in the different industries, the different projects. Then we start collecting data as time gives us more information, and then we can coordinate them together and figure out, maybe we can organize some sort of basic formula or model to govern the systems or govern the economics a little bit more.
So looking at how we're entering a more data-centric world, we can engineer designs to serve the outcomes that we want. I believe token engineering and token economics will continue to gain increasing demand in this space. So how do you begin designing economic systems? First, start with economics. Second, apply engineering in complex systems. Third, analyze how ecosystems evolve from a micro perspective. That could be looking at, from biology, from how viruses evolve, from how DNA changes, how Homo sapiens have been changing throughout the years. And lastly, is to understand why governing policies fail from a macro perspective. So this could be stuff like reading why nations fail, looking at more macroeconomics perspective, understanding how central bank works, understanding all the different governing policies of different countries. So before I end, I want to have 3 discussion takeaways worth pondering. Let me know what you think about them. I try to make them more thought-provoking, and then we can have a lot of discussions. You can film your opinion, put them down in the comments in YouTube or Substack or on LinkedIn. It doesn't matter, just write them down, ping me, and we can start discussing, because I would love to discuss these topics. So, first discussion.
Okay, so question 1. I focus a lot about designing very complicated, complex systems because the world is just getting more complicated. But thinking from an end user's perspective, do you think humans are adaptive enough to live in this very complicated world, to adapt to this complication? If you think about it, sure, humans are adaptive, but there's probably only 20% of people of the entire world really understand things from such high level complication and be comfortable with that. There's a huge other segment of people who are not even aware or comfortable with using so much technology in their lives, or just to understand or to grasp the complexity that the world we're living in today. The other thing is also that with digitization, everything is just instant, it's split seconds. A lot of things, in the decentralized finance world, you have this thing called flash loans, which is where you borrow and return it at the same time. And in between the instantaneous moment, you can do a lot of other trades. So things are getting more complicated, more complex, and are people keeping up to that? We can design the most beautiful, complex systems which requires some level of skill sets or knowledge by the end user. And do people want that? And are people ready for that? For people who are not ready, what can we do to skill them up? What can we do to help them to integrate into this very complex and complicated world? So by now you should realize that when I'm talking about the designer or economic design, as a designer, you hold so much power. It's more than just the token itself, but the entire environment or the ecosystem that the token exists in, and that different participants come together to collaborate and to coordinate and to trade. So every time when it comes to this, there's always trade-offs. Economics is all about trade-offs, opportunity cost, right? There are two things that you could do. You can either maximize profits for your investors, or you can maximize the social utility of the entire network or your ecosystem. And this is where I guess economics is not all-encompassing, because it's quite difficult to bring in moral values and ethics into place, because it's difficult to quantify them. When we can't quantify things easily, it's difficult to model and analyze and improve them. And also, sometimes if you think of efficiency in terms of numbers, then things that are not numbers are quite difficult to come into the optimization model. So as a designer, how do you balance that? How do you balance both sides? Do you want to maximize profits, or do you want to maximize social utility? What do you think is the best trade-off that is fairest to everyone? Do you think there should be a standardized model in token economics? Or do you think because economics is a social science anyway, anything goes? So let me know all the answers in the comments below, or in any way you can find them, or you can just record a video, ping me, and then we can start discussion. I really, really love to hear your thoughts.
And let me know what else you're interested to learn more about, so I can put them in the future episodes to come. Till then, bye!